Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 2 of my September wrap-up. I will link part 1 down below, which will also have content warnings, links, all of that. Let's get into it. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Unknown Beloved by Amy Harmon. This was a buddy read with my friend Amanda from The Curly Reader, and I have enjoyed other things by Amy Harmon in the past, and this is a really interesting genre combination. It's like a historical fiction plus mystery plus a romance, and I really liked it. So we are following two main characters. One of them is Danny Flanagan, or Danny Kosh she also goes by, and then our other main character is Michael Malone, who is an investigator, and both of them are point of view characters, and we see them meet for the first time when Michael is called to the scene of a crime where unfortunately Danny's parents were both murdered, and the official story is that her father killed her mother and then himself, but Danny has never believed that, and Michael doesn't really believe that either, but they obviously have a very unhappy first meeting, and Danny is very young when this happens, and Michael is an adult. He's obviously an investigator, and then we see them meet, cross paths again many years later, where Michael ends up taking a room to rent that is run by Danny and her aunts. And so they're living in Cleveland now. Danny ended up going to stay with her aunts or great aunts after her parents were killed in Chicago. And so the two of them have crossed paths, and Michael is here to investigate a serial killer in Cleveland. And the two of them eventually end up working together on this case and getting to know each other a lot better, and a romance develops. And I ended up really liking this. There were a couple of things I did not realize going into this, which one of them I definitely should have. I should have realized there was going to be an age gap, because obviously if they meet when she's a child and he's a working adult, there's obviously going to be a pretty a significant age gap, which I'm a hard sell on, but I do think that the book ended up selling me on their relationship, especially once we stopped getting flashbacks to them meeting. I'm stop showing me her as a little kid, and then we go back to them flirting with each other. That's just weird to me, but I ended up actually really enjoying their relationship. And then the other thing I didn't realize, which the synopsis doesn't really talk about, but I think it might be useful to know, is that there's a tiny bit of a speculative element to this, because Danny has the ability to kind of get information and emotions from people's clothing, which obviously ends up becoming very important in an investigation where they are just finding not very much evidence, these bodies that keep turning up that are victims of this serial killer. And then Michael has a little bit of an ability as well that is kind of related to, he can kind of see people's auras a little bit. And at first, because I didn't know this was going to be an element, at first I felt like that was kind of jarring, it didn't really blend with the rest of the story, but I actually think that ended up working really well. As the book went on, I think that started feeling like a much more cohesive part of the story, so I ended up actually really liking the way those things were done, and as I said, I became more sold on the romance as we went as well, and I did really like the interesting genre blend of this. I thought all of those parts were balanced really well, the romance and the mystery, and then the historical fiction aspects. I also enjoy Amy Harmon's writing. I think she's great at emotional stuff and character stuff, but also her writing is very enjoyable to read. It's very pleasant. She's very good at, setting the scene and describing characters, and I also was just very impressed by the way she constructs her stories, the way that she will communicate information in a way that is so seamless. There's a scene where Michael is working through the information that we know about this killer and the victims, and the way that he goes back over everything to kind of reset his assumptions and everything. I just think that's a really smart scene, the way she wrote that, because it makes sense why Michael would do that, but also it gives the reader an opportunity to catch up on the information that we didn't already know about these cases. So just stuff like that I thought was really well written. I also think the tension of the mystery was done really well, this danger and unease. And I also thought the author's note and background information was really fascinating, the way that Amy Harmon talks about pulling real things from history. I didn't realize that this was based on real events, so I thought that was really fascinating as well. Also, one of my favorite things about this book was the themes, the focus on everybody mattering, and that everybody is important, and that nobody should feel their life doesn't make a difference. And I'm not describing it very well, but that was really, really beautiful, and that's something that Danny feels very strongly about, and Michael does too, even though he pretends that he's, kind of tough. And so I really like the way that was such a huge part of this story, and the way that this book connected that to these killings, I thought felt very compassionate. Like, it didn't feel like, I really like the way this book talks about like the sensationalizing of people losing their lives. I just think that was very thoughtful, and even though the book itself is like a mystery that, you know, has all this like drama and tension and everything, I like that this book kept that very connected the whole time to these people and their lives and those mattering. As far as things that I wasn't as sold on, even though I said that I did end up enjoying the romance, I think this has happened a couple times with books from Amy Herman where I like the relationship, but I just kept wanting to like it more than I did. I don't know, like there's just like a tiny bit missing for me from that, but I did still enjoy them as characters and as a couple. And then also the third act breakup was stupid. Like, I almost never like that trope anyway, but it felt especially dumb here. Like, just there was no reason that this had to happen. So yeah, that annoyed me. And then also I feel like the very ending, like the resolution of the mystery or the way things happened, like the way the reveal was done, it felt a little bit anticlimactic in comparison to how great the tension was in the rest of the book. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I gave The Unknown Beloved 4 stars. Next, I finished The Ghost Bride by Yang Zi-Chu. This is a historical book that is set in, what year? 1893 in Malaya or Malaysia, and we are following a main character who is Chinese. So I really learned a lot about the like blend of like history and like backgrounds of people living in Malaysia at this time. Like, Malaysia has people who have been living there for generations, but then there's also these Chinese people who came over and like they still view themselves as Chinese, but then also Malaysia is currently being like occupied and colonized by the British, and I just thought that was really, really interesting, like a very interesting context to set a story in. So we are following our main character Li Lang, and she is offered the opportunity to become a ghost bride. Basically what that means is that there was a young man who died very early, and their family wants to placate his ghost by marrying him off symbolically to somebody. And that's a pretty rare practice, but it is something that people sometimes did at this time. And Li Lang really doesn't want to, but then like this very interesting series of events happens where she ends up spending a lot of time in like different parts of the Chinese afterlife, like crossing between that and like the world, and meeting a lot of other characters. She ends up learning about these like mysteries and family secrets and conspiracies, and like this is a really hard book to summarize because it went so many different directions and like I wasn't really expecting them. Like, I've been interested in this book for a while, and this is one of those books where I don't know if anybody else does this, but like sometimes there's a book that like you have been wanting to read for so long that without realizing it, you form expectations of what the story is going to be about. And then by the time you get to it, you don't, like, you have these expectations, but you don't realize it. That's kind of what happened with this one for me. But I did end up enjoying it. Like, you'll see when I get to the things that like frustrated me, you're going to be like, this doesn't sound like you like this book as much as you say you did, but I really did. I liked Li Lang, and I thought the characterization in general was interesting. There were a few side characters in particular that I really liked, including this guy Erlong, who he was very frustrating sometimes, but he was very interesting and I liked him a lot. And I also really loved Li Lang's like maid slash like nurse kind of, like her kind of companion in a way, and I just really, really loved her, and the way that like we see how much that she loves Li Lang, even though their relationship is very complicated at times. As I said, I thought the setting and the history were really well done. I really liked the way that we learned so much about like Chinese and Malaysian beliefs and practices around death and grieving and the afterlife. And the author talks in her author's note about how like she wasn't trying to like just take those beliefs and put them in the story. She kind of interpreted them in different ways. And there are some places where like we don't really know exactly what the practices or beliefs were about something, and so she kind of extrapolated from that to kind of create her own story, which I thought was interesting. I was invested in the mystery as well. And then there were also some parts of the ending that I really, really loved, like especially that last chapter that is only a couple pages. I really loved that. I think that is like such an interesting way to end this book. It fit really well. I just really loved that ending. But as for things that I didn't like so much, I found Li Lang's decision process pretty frustrating and kind of incomprehensible at times. Like, there were a lot of times in this book where she would do something or she would make a choice and I'm like, this seems like a really bad idea. But I think the reason it didn't like completely turn me off her as a character or this book in general is that there were a lot of times where even though it felt like this was a bad move, I couldn't really see what the right decision would be. So like, I guess it kind of made sense, but that was just like kind of frustrating. And then also there were sections of this book that I think dragged, that I was kind of bored for. Like, especially there's like a couple of sections where like Lei Lung is like traveling, or there's like this extended like spy sequence, and there's a lot of like places where Lei Lung doesn't really know what she's doing, so she just kind of wanders around for a while. And while that's understandable, it wasn't terribly compelling as a story. I also think like there's a couple of male characters who Lei Lung is kind of interested in, and I feel like, I don't know, this is like a pet peeve of mine. I feel like characters' attractiveness was noted at really weird times. I know that's not something that bugs everybody, but it bugs me, so I didn't like that. I also think there were some missed opportunities with the mystery here, and some like suspicious characters. Like, I had ideas about what I thought was going on. Personally, I think those are more interesting than some of the things that actually happened. Like, there was just stuff that we set up where I was like confused about why we spent time on this if it wasn't going to come into the story in like a more significant way. And then also kind of related to the decision-making thing, Lei Lung's indecisiveness about the love triangle kind of grated on my nerves a little bit. Like, because there was a point near the end of the book where like it felt like she should have made a decision already. Like, I understand being torn between these like different people, and especially what that would mean for her in her life, but like she was like waffling at a point where I'm like, you're about to marry one of them. Like, could we make a decision here? So that was like a little annoying, but overall I did enjoy this book. It's one of those where like maybe the things that frustrated me should have made me overall feel less positively about this book, but for some reason it just ended up really working for me better than you might think. And I gave The Ghost Bride 4 stars. I do definitely see though why this would be a book that not everybody would enjoy, and I also think that Yang Si-chu's writing style and the way that she would like kind of explain like world building and scenes and everything, and the way that would blend with the descriptions, I think can be a little confusing sometimes. Like, there were a couple places where I had to reread things to figure out like what was going on or why we were here or like something like that. And I've heard that like her writing style can kind of be like that, so that is something to keep in mind, but I enjoyed this. Next, I finished Deep Light by Frances Hardinge. This was, of course, from my Nanhana's Frances Hardinge read-along. I will link our live show. This is one of the only books remaining from her that I had not read, and this is a kind of water-based or water-adjacent fantasy, which I tend to really enjoy. We're following our main character, Hark, who lives on the island of Lady's Crave, and there's like this series of islands that they live in this area where they were really kind of like terrorized by these like old gods, and then there's like this war between the old gods, and they like kill each other basically, and so now the people on these islands make a living, a lot of them do, by like finding like pieces of these gods and like selling them or like using them for things. And there's all these like stories about like the old days, you know, when the gods would like rise out of the sea and things like that. And like I said, our main character is Hark, and he is kind of like a low level kind of con man. Like, he's kind of doing his best to just get by. And then his best friend Jelt shows up again and asks him to like be a part of this like more ambitious criminal enterprise, and Hark doesn't really want to, but he kind of goes along with it because that's usually what happens with him and Jelt. And then a lot of other things end up happening. Hark actually gets kind of indentured at one point and gets sent to like this island where they take care of like the priests who used to like serve these old gods, and him and Jelt end up finding something in the ocean that is not quite like the other like godware, it seems like, and that ends up leading to a lot of conflict as well. It seems like this is maybe very dangerous in addition to being very valuable, and like this is another book that's kind of hard to explain. Frances Hardinge books are always hard to sum up. Yeah, so this is my new least favorite Frances Hardinge, which is very sad. I ended up settling on 3 stars because even though there were things that I really didn't like about it that made me think like, oh my gosh, am I gonna give a Frances Hardinge book like 2.5 stars? After our live show discussion, it made me pay attention more to the things that I really did enjoy about this book and that I think were done really, really well. So let's start with the good stuff. I really loved Hark as a main character. I always love Frances Hardinge's main characters. Like, I just really, really felt for Hark so much, and I loved seeing him like realize that he's not as like cold and selfish as he maybe thinks he is. Like, I loved seeing the way that he, even though he's like kind of had to become good at like hiding himself as like a survival mechanism. We see him start to become more comfortable with some characters. There's also a character named Selfin who I absolutely loved. I wish she had been in this book more because she was one of my favorite parts. And she is actually deaf, and I really like the way that Frances Hardinge creates this like deaf culture in a fantasy world where like these things like where people who are deaf are honored, like they're called sea-kissed, and the way that like that has all this meaning in this society. Frances Hardinge actually like wrote this book for a specific reader of hers who wrote to her and said, you know, that she is deaf and she was wondering if Frances Hardinge would ever write a character who was. And she did. She wrote a whole book like that. And I think it was done very respectfully. Like you can tell from her notes and everything that she worked really hard on this. Like she worked really carefully and closely with this girl to get things right. She worked with like organizations to get things right. And I also think she did a great job of incorporating that and making Selfin a really fully fleshed out and well done character without like centering Frances Hardinge's writing of an experience that she doesn't have. You know, like she didn't write like a protagonist with this experience, but Selfin is a very important character, and I just feel like all of that was done really beautifully. I also always love Frances Hardinge's writing. I think the world of this book is really, really interesting. Like in a way, this book is very insular because it's all set on just a few of these islands, and I thought that was just very interesting, like the way that we get little like bits of information about other places, but like most of the story is just in these islands, and their backstory is so interesting. And I really loved some of the themes like about identity and like the parts of yourself that you refuse to lose. I just thought that was super interesting, really well done. Yeah, so there were a lot of good things about this book, but I also had a lot of things I did not like. The biggest one was Jelt. I freaking could not stand him. Like I hated him so much, and like that is an example of good writing because Jelt is supposed to be a very frustrating character. I think this book does a really great job of showing a toxic friendship and how damaging and horrible those are, and Frances Hardinge did a good job with Jelt. But he was one of those characters where it's not just that I disliked him, but like I actively hated reading this book when he was in it, which is not usually a good thing. So like that wasn't fun. Like I just really, really didn't like him. So like basically all my favorite parts were when Jelt wasn't around, which kind of sucked because Jelt was pretty important in this book. And then also this is the first Frances Hardinge book where I was like really bored for long stretches. Because even though like the concept in the world was interesting, and I'm usually a huge fan of like water-based or water-adjacent fantasy, I was not interested. Like this book felt really long to me. This edition is giant, so it's only 400 pages or so, but like I just was not interested in like a lot of the, I don't know, like some of the things that were happening, and just like I'm having a hard time describing like the parts of the plot that felt really dull to me. So like I don't know why that's so hard for me to like put my finger on. And I think another problem I had is something that Hannah mentioned about a different book of hers, where like Hannah mentioned one of her favorite parts is the like part of where a Frances Hardinge protagonist will kind of get her group of allies together, and that doesn't really happen in this book until very near the end, and that wasn't as satisfying to me. I didn't like those characters as much for the most part. And then also there were some things like in terms of the themes or the, like ideas or motifs that I had mixed feelings about. So I don't know. I'm like really sad. This was a disappointment for me. I gave Deep Light 3 stars, as I said. It's not like a horrible book. I think it's interesting that even though Frances Hardinge is a pretty underhyped author, if people have read one of her books, I feel like a lot of times it's this one, and people love it. Like people really, really love this book. So, you know, don't take my review as like the only opinion about it, obviously, but I was disappointed. Next, I finished Once Upon a Forbidden Desire, and I can't remember the editors of this like fantasy romance anthology, so I will put that in captions. But I read this as an ebook. I pre-ordered the ebook, and the reason I heard about this is because Colleen Cowley mentioned in her author newsletter that she had a story coming out in this, and I just finished and really loved her Subversive series, and so I was like, yes, definitely want to read anything that you write, basically. And there were also a couple of other authors who I've read and enjoyed before, so I forgot I had pre-ordered this, or I forgot what day it was coming out, and it just like I suddenly got a notification when I was trying to decide like something I wanted to start that night, so it worked out perfectly. This is a fantasy romance collection by a bunch of different authors, and a lot of them, I think all of them actually, are retellings of fairy tales or other stories, which obviously very much up my alley. And something I really love about this collection is that the amount of like information that they give you about each story like right before you read it. So not only does it tell you like the steaminess level, but it will also mention content warnings or content notes, and then it will also mention like specific elements in the romance that like not everybody might, you know, want to read, like certain tropes or things like that, which I just found all of that super helpful. Like I knew going into this collection that there were going to be some that I wasn't going to read just because it's so not my thing that it would not make sense to like give an author's story a bad rating when I knew it like wasn't for me. For example, like Monster Erotica, not at all for me. So I ended up only reading 11 stories out of 20, but I really enjoyed a lot of those ones. So I'm just gonna go through my notes really quick because there's some that I want to talk about specifically. How to Marry a Winged King by AJ Lancaster. I loved that one. I gave it 5 stars. That is like such a fun and interesting and cool take on Cinderella. I loved her writing and the characters, and I was really sold on the romance even though this was a short story. The Prince and the Fairy Godmother by H.R. Moore, I gave 4 stars. I enjoyed this one a lot, even though I would have preferred it if the romance hadn't started before the story did. That's just not something I enjoy as much, but that was still very good. Heartful by Lisette Marshall, I also gave 4 stars, and I'm actually really shocked at how much I enjoyed that one, because that one is a Rapunzel retelling that incorporates some of the ideas of the original, but in a way that gives the Rapunzel character back her agency, and like the focus on consent was great. Like I just ended up really liking that one. Like that was another one that I feel like I was very convinced by the romance even though it is so short, and I feel like the passage of time was shown very well. Blood Dance by Vela Roth, I gave 3.75 stars. It was really close to 4 stars, but like word choice. Word choice is so important with like explicit scenes, and I used my least favorite word multiple times, but then there were just other things where I'm like, just not for me. Breathing Techniques for Water Nymphs by Erin Veer, I gave 4.5 stars. I did want more development for the romance, but I mostly believed the relationship anyway. I just really liked the concept and the story for this one, and it got an extra half star for me for averting the jealous mean girl trope. I really love that. Then another one of my favorites was Colleen Cowley's story, which was Into the Bargain. I gave that 5 stars. It was so good, but this made me think of my friend Margaret from The Word Nerd. I wanted more kissing, but it was an excellent story. Then Wish Upon a Frog by J.C. Jarvis, I gave 4 stars. I didn't love some of the sex scenes for that one, and I feel like they were kind of oddly placed in the story, but overall I did enjoy it. I really liked the characters and like the setup for the story. It's like a really interesting Frog Prince retelling, but is gender swapped, and I did really like the male lead a lot, both the main characters actually. And then the last one I wanted to give specific thoughts for is Her Majesty's Wolf by Elle Penelope. I gave that one 4 stars. This one was like, it felt a little bit insta-lovey, but I think they had, like the couple had some really nice scenes together, and so that ended up selling me anyway. I will link my Goodreads review down below if you want to see the specific stories that I skipped and a few other ones that I read but I didn't talk about here. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I gave Once Upon a Forbidden Desire 4 stars, and I think it's really cool that like basically whatever you like in romance in terms of tropes, like characters, like retellings of different stories, like steaminess, anything like that, I feel like you will find at least a few that really work for you in this collection. So I think that's really cool. Next, I finished The Fight by Veronica Chambers and the staff of the New York Times. The subtitle is The Brave and Revolutionary Women Who Fought for the Right to Vote. This was a present from my lovely friend Taylor from Page Screen Taylor, so thank you. And I loved this. This is a really short nonfiction book, specifically focusing on the queer women and women of color who were instrumental in getting the right to vote for women in the US, but who are often left out of history. And I thought this was really well done. I liked the layout. I liked the concepts for the different chapters. I like the coloring of the photographs was like an interesting touch. There was obviously a lot of this that I was familiar with, but I did still learn quite a bit, so I really enjoyed that. And I can't really think of anything that this should have done like better. I think for a short overview, it did a really good job of giving you like a good sense of like some of the many histories of women who were so important and who don't often get their due. And I gave Finish the Fight 5 stars. Next, I finished The Return of the Sorceress by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I'm running out of Silvia Moreno Garcia books to read, but I did really enjoy this one. I'm glad I finally read it. This was a very limited print run of a novella that she published through Subterranean Press, or released through there. And this is a really, like, this is like a sword and sorcery kind of fantasy novella, and it's like a revenge story. Our main character is Yalshi, I think is her name. Yeah, Yalshi. And she sets out on a mission to get revenge on her like ex-lover, and that's also connected to like the magical power, like the position that she used to have. yeah, this was very interesting. At first I gave it 3.75 stars because there were some things that I found like frustrating with the ending, but I ended up bumping it up to 4 stars because the more I think about the ending, the more I like it. I thought there was so much great world building in this story for how short it was, and as I said, I did end up really loving the ending. I do think though that I wasn't as invested in the characters as I usually get with her work, which I guess maybe makes sense because it is so short, but I was hoping for a little more from the characters, and I also feel like her writing wasn't quite as smooth as some of her other things. But in general, I'm glad I read this. I really enjoyed it, and I gave The Return of the Sorceress 4 stars. Okay, and then the last book I'm talking about today is Half Upon a Time by James Riley. This is the first book in a trilogy that I think is just called the Half Upon a Time series, maybe. This is a kind of fairy tale inspired story. As you can see, there are some Jack and the Beanstalk elements, and there's a lot of other fairy tales kind of mixed up in it. We're following our main character Jack, and I think his name is Jack. Yeah. We're following our main character Jack, and one day this girl named May just like falls out of the sky, and I don't know if it's confirmed, but like it's very, very strongly implied that she is from like our real world, and she's just gotten dropped into this fantasy fairy tale world. And like the two of them end up going on a quest, and they end up getting joined by a couple other characters, and they're trying to get May's grandmother back because she disappeared, and they think that she might actually be the long lost Snow White, and that this whole kidnapping and everything is a plot by the Wicked Queen. And I sadly did not enjoy this very much at all. I ended up giving it 2.75 stars. I did enjoy some of the fairy tale elements, and occasionally there were some things that were funny. Most of the time the humor didn't land for me, but sometimes it did. This was also a very quick read, which I appreciated. And I think the story went in some interesting directions, especially with the end. Some of the things I saw coming and some of them I didn't, and I thought there were just some interesting choices made. But overall, I did not have a good time with this. I found the characters so bland. Like May and Jack just were not very interesting to me. I don't think they were very well written. As I said, the humor wasn't really my thing most of the time. I also think the focus on the like romance or the crush was weirdly written to me. Like I think it is definitely possible to write middle grade books where characters are, you know, they have a crush, or they're like maybe figuring out they're romantically interested in another, like, you know, preteen or young teenager. I think there are ways to write that don't feel weird. This one felt very weird to me, especially because like I think May and Jack are supposed to be maybe like 14 or something, but a lot of the time they read a lot younger. And so just the way that their like feelings for each other were written just felt very uncomfortable to me and just like poorly written. This was also another book where I just found the plot really boring. Like there was so much traveling, and like just the amount of times that they would like get somewhere and then they'd like meet another bad guy, and then they'd like, you know, get trapped by the bad guy, and then they're like, oh no, what are we gonna do? And then they have this like idea that they think won't work, and then it starts to work, and then it doesn't, and something else goes wrong, and then they like are running again, and like just it felt very repetitive, and it was just not interesting to me to read about. There's also some like casual sexism in here that I really didn't like. It wasn't a huge part of the book, but I hate that it was there at all. And then also another big issue I had was the weirdly imbalanced tone of this book. Similarly to one of the problems I had with the Nevermore books, I just don't like the combination of like really messed up stuff and then like whimsical hijinks really didn't gel for me. I really didn't like that. Like there's a lot of places that this feels like, you know, it's supposed to be a fun, wacky adventure, but then there are things that happen. Like at one point, the characters hear a friend of theirs who is another kid being tortured in the next room. And it's not explicit or anything, but like there was just stuff like that that like really, I feel like this book couldn't figure out where it wanted to sit in terms of that tone, and I think that there are lots of really great books that do balance those things well, like the Time series by Megan Morrison, basically anything by Frances Harding. I also think the Love, Sugar, Magic series by Anna Mariano, like that one's not so much like, you know, dealing with like scary elements as it is with like really like heavy moments, like grief. The second book deals a lot with grief, and I feel like the way that is balanced with the fun of that series is just really fantastic. So it is very possible to do those things well. This book to me just didn't do them well. Like didn't do that balance of tone well at all. I just really didn't like this. I gave Half Upon a Time 2.75 stars. I am happily DNFing and unhauling the series. Okay, so we kind of ended on a dud there, but let me know a disappointing book for you recently. I'm very sad about finding a new least favorite Frances Harding, but you know, that's bound to happen even with authors you love, so that's okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!